Evening, we're delighted to welcome our very own John Gillam. John is a loyal Jungs Society committee member and a great supporter of his lovely wife Kirsten in her several presentations here on Friday nights and her meditative workshops. This evening, Nourished, a Jungian perspective. John has worked as a librarian, a technology innovative officer with the National Library and with the online bibliographic database and publications. He's worked to develop the Australian National Satellite System and in telecommunications. John remains engaged in computerised translation services and in the evening evolving. John's presentation will go for about an hour and we'll have a short break of the yummies over there and resume for discussion and questions. Note that we'll be recording this event for later reference. If you are here on Zoom, please remain muted while John is speaking. Use Zoom chat for comments and we'll open up later for discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you, John.
And good evening, everybody, and good evening to our Zoom audience. Have we got many on Zoom tonight? A couple of you I hear out there. Well, here we go. Let me just begin by adding my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet tonight. And to begin, just the front desk, there is a handout of the notes for tonight, so you don't have to keep all the references to Jung and a few other bits and pieces that we'll get into, including this diagram of the world of ChatGPT, which we'll look at in a bit more detail. But in the handout, please take that with you so you've got that to refer back to. And on the next slide, thanks, Jeff. This one, if anybody wants an introduction to signing on to ChatGPT, then this is a little booklet that I've put together, which just gives you the very simple instructions of how to log on the first time and then how to log on in subsequent times and just some of the routine stuff. It doesn't get into detail. It's really just being able, allowing you to being able to sign on and have a bit of a play with it. That is only available on PDF at the moment. So if you'd like it, by going to the Jung Society website, drop us an email and we'll do what we can to get a copy back out to you free. Nothing's charged here. So to get going, let's just ask a couple of questions. Let's find out what we know about GPT. Have you not heard about GPT? Raise your hand if you've not heard about it. Gosh, we're in a bunch of people who are right up to it. We won't leave you behind. And secondly, have you not used ChatGPT? A few more. Okay, few ideas tonight, and that free little booklet that I was talking about, if you want to go further, it's right down your street to just get going and have a play. And then the last of the questions, this is a more positive one. Are you concerned about the use of ChatGPT? Raise your hand. Oh gosh, we're right there, aren't we? And that's really the beginning then of the few bits and pieces I've got tonight, because it's not value-free, a system such as ChatGPT. If you think back, we've been this way before. When Google search came out, people were concerned about what was the information coming up, where was it coming from, copyright issues, privacy issues, who's storing your Google searches. You might remember all of that. When we got into Facebook and WeChat and so on, again, similar issues, new communications technology and people becoming worried about what's going on. And ChatGPT is of itself no different. It might just have the ring of high tech. It's certainly the flavour of the month in almost all the magazines at the moment. It was born for the public in November of last year and has had an enormously rapid take-up to the point now where they're starting to move on to several new generations of ChatGPT. Give that a mention just down the track. These people are, for the Western world, are essentially the leaders. The guy on the left, Sam Altman, is the head of OpenAI, which is the company that owns and operates ChatGPT. The guy in the middle, Brad Smith, is the president of Microsoft, and they've invested squillions in OpenAI to get access to the database behind ChatGPT. Chat a little bit about that. And the guy on the right is Google's CEO, Sundar, and his organization is playing catch up, and they have their own database structure behind it. The importance of these people, for us at least in the Western world, are that they are driving this fully commercially and they're not stopping. But on the next slide, it's good, isn't it? Sal from OpenAI, the people who own ChatGPT, says this: I think people should be happy that we are a little bit scared. These language models, i.e. the database behind ChatGPT, these language models could be used for large-scale disinformation and could be used for offensive cyber attacks. So right at the beginning, even though we might be enthusing about using it, even the people that are providing it to us are getting scared of like Pandora's box is open. And what can be used for good generally can also be used for bad. Their major concerns essentially can be summarised as this. First and above all is fraud and deception. The using of databases with language elements in them are easily used for fraud and deception. Secondly, there are copyright issues. Who owns what? Where is ChatGPT getting its information? The same arguments we've heard when Google search got going. Where is Google search getting all of this stuff from? Where is it? It's essentially giving only citations and links to documents, but rapidly Google found that they could store documents. And then those issues of copyright and onwards into privacy came up. Not to scare you, but on the next slide, whilst we think ChatGPT is great, the negative side, the devil side of our environment has arrived. Worm GPT, if you ever see that run, or you're on the internet and this comes up, this is where very, very smart people are using the underlying technology of ChatGPT for bad purposes, for criminal intent, to write scammy emails that look so good and so like the originals that we get fooled and get scammed. Pass on quickly, Jeff, of these people. And to Carl Jung. He said, this is not his original writing, a lady has compiled this book, but in that she has got a piece of his work in which she quotes him as saying, and this is kind of the underlying message of my talk, it's not to get into the technology, but it's how it's being used. And the theme Jung gives me in these words: technology is neither good nor bad, neither harmful nor harmless. Whether it be used for good or ill depends on our attitude. And that's so, I think, so much at the core of what people are talking about when they come to regulate, legislate, provide guardrails for this kind of technology, because it is so potent. Carl Jung was not a stranger to new technology, and I think that it gave him some exposure to things to think about when new communication technologies come into play. I just put this one here. He was 12 when telephony made its major incursion into Switzerland. He was 56 when radio broadcasting started in Switzerland, and leading up to the year of his death, television got going in Switzerland. And to that extent, he did have exposure to new communications technologies, new ways of people communicating, and how, in a sense, the medium was providing a colour to what was being presented. Telephony lets you send a message in a certain way, radio does it in another way, and television does it in another way. And you can extend that right out into WeChat, Facebook, and of course, ChatGPT. So Carl Jung was able to have some insight about the way these new communications technologies should be looked at, should be considered, even to look at the risks that they were presenting. Just before we get deeply into that, can I just get into a couple of slides on just how ChatGPT is organised? Here are across the top, OpenAI at the top, Microsoft, Google. In the next middle line, GPT 3.5 and GPT-4 are the big, large language bases that OpenAI has developed and trained. And out of that, as you drop to the bottom screen, bottom left, ChatGPT, which is the free access version that we have available, and ChatGPT Plus, which is a $20 a month subscription service. And you get, whether you go free or subscription, you get access to, well, in the case of GPT-4, you get an even bigger database than the one that we can use for free. A little bit more about that. The competitors are on their way. Microsoft is using the GPT-4 for its own large language database, and it sells it as Bing Chat. So if you're used to using Microsoft's Bing search engine, it now combines traditional search engine with this extra added business shell.
Is that new Bing when you go into Microsoft Edge with your browser, you get new Bing?
Yeah, it's got a couple of names, yes. Yeah. And finally, Google, in some ways, is playing catch up over here in the right-hand column. Their large language base, which they have put together themselves, Palm 2, is available as Bard. And it's also developing a number of new names as they try to find a market position for it. This is probably the key diagram to understanding what's going on in those large language databases. I'll just talk through it first and then we'll come back to it. This is a representation of the structure of one of these large language databases, trying to put together the answer to the question, my hair color is red. There are probabilities embedded in this. It's all about the probability that the first word, my, is going to be followed by the word favourite, hair or name. And when they train these large databases, they go through the whole of the English language as they find it on the internet, and they work out what frequency, the highest frequency of one word being followed by another. In this case, you could say, well, we could leave up my favourite colour is red. And there's a different probability that my and favourite, the favourite will follow my at a higher or lower frequency than my hair or my name. And the database goes through all of these words and calculates the probability of which word is going to be followed by which next word. And when it gets right all the way to the end, it calculates the probability that its main sentence will come together in that format. So that's very laborious. They may call it artificial intelligence, but it really is a set of probabilities, statistical probabilities. The fact that anybody could ever program something to do that, to just take in all the information on the internet, scoop it all up and look at each word and how the frequency of probability that it will be followed by the next word, if the word after is a probability that matches, and the context of the question that you put into it, into ChatGPT. So there's a lot going on, but that is what's behind this style of database. They call it intelligent, but in a sense, it's simply being programmed statistically to come back with a certain answer. And they've done it so well that it's writing incredibly good English so that we think that we're actually communicating with the database, with ChatGPT. And in all of this, in the database that GPT 3.5 or GPT-4, that's the big database. ChatGPT is the front-ending software that's conversational. It gives you the idea that you can ask it anything. You don't have to have keywords. You just put the sentence down the way you think or how you write, and it will go off and find the probability of the words you've used coming together in a sentence and providing an answer to your question. You may want a review, a summary, a report, an email message, the format you choose, and then it goes away and does all of these calculations of probabilities and gives you what looks to be quite stunning. Has anybody actually used GPT to that extent? What was your sense of, it's almost like a human talking back to me?
For about a week, 4 days or so, I used it.
Yes.
The new thing.
Yeah.
And it's really blown away by the area, like the main acknowledged country to get across it. And it's quite stunning. And I thought, my God, this is going to change our people research. And, but different attitudes to it, from what I can gather back there. Some really say we're going to teach students how to use this, technology, we're going to use it in the workplace, we say we're going to use it.
Yeah.
By the way, some people are like, have no business with it.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Anyone else?
Question much quicker than Google. I could find it much quicker. It could do much quicker than if I'd done a Google search. Of course,
Yes.
there's, like, say, in one of my novels, does a well relate to Carly in any way? That would have taken me a while to find on Google, but it just gave me the answer straight away. Then on another occasion, I asked it to do a non-rhyming poem, and it did it. A week later, I couldn't do a non-rhyming. I just kept giving me a rhyming one. So that was quite interesting.
Yes, there's a ways to go yet in the probabilities and so on. And when you're asking for a particular format to the point of poetry, rhyming or otherwise, it's asking a lot of the current programming sort of get all that together, but it does a reasonable job. But it's, sometimes it gets into what they technically call ad hallucination, where it's the probabilities of this word following that word, it just gets lost in those probabilities, and garbage comes out. And I've experienced that too, that you think you've asked a good question, but just on that moment when it went through its database, garbage in, garbage out, they might have used to say. But it's still an interesting tool to be using. In this area, rather than the technological side of it, Jung was into the language and the structure of the language, the meaning of the language, how we communicate with each other using language. And there's a number of slides here, which there's a kind of a statement first and then a quote from Jung to back it up. And Jung pointed us, even when we're looking at ChatGPT, to, or any of these other communications technologies, have a think about what's going on in the human interaction with the technology. First, symbolic language. Jung stressed the significance of symbols as deeper psychological representations that tap into the collective unconscious. And the quote behind that I found, language in its origin and essence is simply a system of signs or symbols that denote real occurrences or their echo in the human soul. Rob. No, it doesn't do too well with referencing, direct referencing. I use Bing and Google search. So once ChatGPT, that helped me with all of this presentation, once it gave me the ideas, which was the previous slide, encapsulating an idea, then I went off to in the regular search engines to find a good quote and kind of back it up. Unconscious influences. When you read through some of the commentary about ChatGPT, I've been struck that a lot of these ideas, these things to think about that Jung was writing, is really embedded in some of the critique, some of the analysis of ChatGPT, even, of course, of Google search or other search engines, the way they select the documents to present to you. It's not a new problem, and it's not a problem exclusively ChatGPT. People for the last decade or so have said, well, how does Google select the documents that it gives you, that it puts on the first or the second page? And there have been all sorts of discussions, even the odd court case or two, that the search algorithm used by, let's pick on them, Google, is predetermining an outcome depending on, say, who is an advertiser on Google, or a particular line of, not questioning, but of information that Google's search engines, their algorithms, are primed to produce a certain answer based on factors, like I said, who advertises with them and so on. So whether you get ranked on the first page or the second page of Google is not really what is the Google search engine finding the very best articles for you. There's a bit more to it, bit of politicking, if you like. That's embedded, I think, in this notion that there's more going on than you may think on the surface. And the quote from Jung, language is the most important phenomenon of the unconscious. And like the latter, it is neither an isolated nor a marginal phenomenon of the mind, but is a central function. I pause to reflect on that. You can see these things seeking in, and we'll come back to what are other people dealing with these ideas. The next one is Okay. It's perfectly good, Jeff. I don't know why it's suddenly looking at it. Personal or collective meaning. Jung highlighted that language carries both personal and collective meanings shaped by individual experiences and cultural contexts. It's all right, I'll just turn the page too quickly. It's all on me. And in Jung's words, language is our indispensable tool for communicating with others, but at the same time, it is also the instrument that isolates us from one another. And I'm thinking back here to the slide that was showing the probabilities that one word will follow another. Because in the training of the database, when ChatGPT's database behind it has been fed a whole lot of information, it's picking up the way we use the language and the words that follow the next words and so on. That pattern is being picked up by ChatGPT in the works that it's being fed on, and so is picking up the way we use the language, the sorts of thoughts that we have in constructing the language. So it's not neutral. We can't be neutral. We're a product of our education, our country, our civilization, our culture. This is the way ChatGPT is picking that up for this kind of personal and collective meaning. And then as you go from one country to another, what is personal and collective meaning in America may not be so in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, or the UK. There are subtle differences. And as you get into ChatGPT, you could ask it when you're asking questions, please answer me in Australian English, not American English. And in that sense, you're trying to overcome any bias that ChatGPT might have towards the way the Americans think, the way the Americans write, because they're obviously the dominant culture that's based in the training of these databases. Psychological projection, another item from Jung. Jung introduced the concept of the psychological projection, where individuals unconsciously attribute their own qualities onto others. This influences how language is used. And that's talking to what I was saying just a few moments ago, that the way these databases are trained, it picks up the way we use our language already. So its responses from ChatGPT are going to reflect that kind of formatting, that kind of way of speaking, the use of myths or metaphors or idioms or the meaning certain words are attributed. That's all being fed into those probability algorithms that it uses. So again, ChatGPT is not free of some of these influences, some of these biases. And Jung would say, language is the form in which the unconscious psychic processes become conscious. Archetypes and mythology. Well, again, these things get embedded in what we use. Maybe we have allusions to cricket and so on that the Americans don't. The Europeans might have allusions to soccer, or they may call it football, and you get an answer back about football and you're really an Aussie rules follower. It starts to get a bit mishmashy, and ChatGPT is not that smart. I once asked it to answer me back in Australian English, and I have never seen a greatest collection of Aussie idioms put together in one sentence. You know, it was about blokes, it was about dogs on tucker box, and so it went. You know, I bit gross when I say that, but it was amazing how it had taken on that day the idea that all Australians spoke in these bizarre idioms or slang that we have that are quite unique to us. I threw that out, I can tell you. I didn't go any further with that. I thought I'm beaten. And in Jung's words, the archetypes, the mythology, the language of the symbols are the springs from which the psychology of the self is nourished. And ChatGPT, in a sense, is nourishing us. We consult it, we use it. Are we putting our personalities into it? Are we our shadow self? Are we asking the questions from our shadow self or from our main self? What is our intent in questioning ChatGPT? Because unlike, you could get a bit of this out of Google search, but it gives documents back, or document links back, and then you can sort a bit of that out yourself. But if you're going to really do this properly, you've got to be aware that you're asking the question because you hate somebody, because you like somebody, because you want to promote a particular idea or political party, and so on. This is not neutral territory, any of this. Well, if you can get that kind of thing out of Google search, ever the more can you get that sort of thing out of ChatGPT, because it will put the answer together for you and make it look as though this is it. This is the real answer. This is the answer you wanted. Fully tailored, customized, written just for you. And the question is, well, did I really mean to get that? And what was I thinking? What was I driving at the time when I was asking the question? Did I really want the answer to come back in a certain way? And here we've got Jung kind of alerting us to think about things like that. And then the individuation and self-expression. Jung saw language as a tool for self-expression and the process of individualism, enabling individuals to articulate their thoughts and integrate unconscious aspects of the self. And in a sense, with a chatbot like ChatGPT, you're doing this. You're getting into a conversation. You're asking it questions. You're asking it a second question. You're saying, you told me this, but I really was looking for that. Talk to me. And so on. You've got this going. And as Jung would say, language can only deal meaningfully with a special restricted segment of reality. The rest, and it is presumably the much larger part, is silence. Well, you can pause to reflect on that one. What's there? What are we choosing to see? What are we choosing to use? What was presented to us? And how are we going to continue with whatever we're being told? So, to kind of pull a few of these strings together, the relevance of Jung's work. It's not to ChatGPT and the technology, it's to ChatGPT as an interhuman communications device, an application. Here it's saying Jung's work offers a theoretical framework that deepens our understanding of the human psyche and its relationship with language and symbols. And that's the connection. Jung here, language and symbols there, and all that other shadow stuff and so on, and ChatGPT. They are connected. As Google search was connected, as WeChat, as all these other radio, TV, movies, are all in this game of perceptions, transmitting ideas. The technology itself is able to transmit the ideas in a certain way because the technology is either visual, a la TV, it's either sound, a la radio, and it's all this mishmash of words in our language that are being used, manipulated, presented, customized. So if Jung were here, is a brave estimate that he would say, cultivate self-awareness. Just let me turn my pages. I've been talking without following the script. Cultivate self-awareness. The idea being, if you're going to sit in front of the screen, kind of know why you're there and what you're up to. Is this just surfing? Is it brainstorming? Do you seriously want the answers to certain questions? Or in the case of ChatGPT, do you want a friend to talk to? And ChatGPT is used in that area. There are provisos around using it as a friend because it doesn't have human understanding of human emotions. It's just repeating the probability that one word will follow another. If you ask it, why am I depressed? It will tend to go back to literature to find out what words go with the word depressed. And back comes the answer. Whether or not that's appropriate for yourself, when you get into this psychological area, that's an issue where a human therapist is really the only area. But it may help you crystallize your thoughts on a topic. But to follow its advice, to do something in a kind of mental space, I think almost everybody that I've read in this field of ChatGPT, they're saying don't. Use it to kind of formulate ideas, but don't necessarily take its advice to do something. It may be highly inappropriate. Cultivate self-awareness. What are your thoughts, feelings, and motivations before and during using ChatGPT? Set an intention. Why am I having this session with ChatGPT? Do I hate someone? Do I like someone? Do I want to write a letter to the bank? Do I want to write an essay, etc.? Clearly get to know what you want out of ChatGPT, because that will be the way you start to ask ChatGPT the question. And it will then in turn start answering you in that format, in that idea, in that bubble of the way you're approaching the issue. Practice active dialogue. Whereas we learned with Google search to use a bunch of keywords, and if it wasn't quite right, then you would go off and you'd vary the keywords. You might put a negative in and say, don't give me all that rugby stuff. I only want Aussie rules, and so on. It's the beginning of this here with something like ChatGPT and its conversational aspects, that you can really ask a question on a question on a question, or ask for clarification. And it's really, in a sense, talking back to you. And there's the notion of this converse and know why you're conversing. Back, as you might have said it, for us, practice active dialoguing. Engage in active questioning, reflection, and exploration during your session. Explore symbols and metaphors. Well, it depends on what you're doing at the time with ChatGPT, but idioms and turns of phrase and so on. If you're using them when you're asking questions of ChatGPT, be careful that it actually is understanding what you're on about. Is it really understanding some Australian slang or idiom that you might just normally use? Did it understand properly? If it didn't, and you read the answer as it comes back, ask again and say, no, that's not what I meant this. And it'll happily apologise and then continue with a new answer. Reflecting on the shadow projection. Well, as I was saying before, know why you're at the keyboard, and whether you're there with an open, warm heart, or whether you really hate somebody and you really want to develop a political document or something that really says, don't vote for them, vote for these guys, and so on. Reflect on, is it your shadow that's asking this question, or is it the real you, dare I say that? And ethical engagement. Well, the image I had up before of the evil twin to ChatGPT's evil twin, Worm GPT. There are people who are using ChatGPT for the worst possible things. One of the great advantages, like if we just take emails, is that ChatGPT has been trained on zillions of emails. Whether that's a privacy issue or not, just suspend that for a moment, but it's got all this phraseology. So if some evil group is saying, I'm going to send out a whole lot of email scammies from Telstra, then ChatGPT could be trained in such a way as to get all the phraseology of Telstra in any communication, any document, any reference thing, even emails that might have got published and out into the public domain. Look at who signs these things off, what little strip is across the bottom to recognise Telstra Australia, ABN, and so on. And even though at the moment we see some of the stuff, particularly say from our banks and the scammers mimicking, and you think, why is my bank talking to me? The quick way, of course, is if you're not a member of Westpac or whatever, you can dismiss it. But if it's your bank talking to you, you think, what's this? These days, I guess we're wise enough to say, if the bank wants to talk to me, they'll talk to me through NetBank or somewhere where codes and passwords have been put in. Well, there are people using Worm GPT to develop the most extraordinary clones of the real thing. It's been true of websites. There's programs which will just simply take Qantas's website, move it over onto a totally different server, mask the URLs, the www. So on and so on, mask all of that. And if you're unfortunate enough to go there and book your Qantas flight and pay money, it doesn't go to Qantas. You've been scammed. And yet, for all intents and purposes, you thought you were dealing with Qantas. Well, in that sense, you haven't seen anything yet. As bad as all that was, this other version, Worm GPT, is being trained to write almost undetectable emails. So, Jung admonishes us to practice ethical engagement, avoid actions that cause harm, spread misinformation, promote discrimination, or violate ethical norms. And just think of what's ahead of us for the American elections next year, of what they did last time round to Hillary Clinton and all the rest. So it's not about the technology itself, but how we engage with it to harness its potential and enhance our lives. To me, that's Jung's message with all those qualifications that we've addressed tonight. Thank you.
So now it's a chance to have some bit of supper, a bit of mixing. We haven't seen some people here that turned up for a while, so it's nice to catch up with you. And we have Sally, that's going to be talking next month, is here. And so you might like to have a chat with her as well. And so you like to mingle, have a cup of tea, a drink, and a bit of socialisation. John. So,
well, Jean says, take questions. Sir. Oh, the microphone, man. Right there beside us.
Look, thanks very much, John. I think it's a really important topic, and to explore how Carl Jung relates to these really rapid changes in technology, which also bring really rapid changes in psychology. Like I've heard it said that the advent of the iPhone or the smartphone is the biggest change in human psychology ever. And it's this sense of a steady cyborgification of human existence, which when you think, before, if you go back thousands of years before writing, people relied on memory and just their own brain to retain information. And then we moved to retaining information on with pen and paper, and now we've got the cloud, and so there's been this outsourcing of memory into technology, and so there's a worry about the withering of capacity due to putting so much of our thinking into a device in our hand rather than in our brain. And so that's one theme that comes out of your talk. But another theme is how Jung was really, like, he wrote a book called Modern Man in Search of a Soul. And there's this sense that the rise of technology has undermined human spirituality, and so it's got these dangerous implications for mental health, I suppose. And so I'll I might come back with some further comments, but I'd just be interested if you have reflections on those issues.
Yes, when I was putting the talk together, and to read through the bits and pieces where Jung was saying the impact that the way we use language has on our psyches and our demeanor, our emotions, and so on. I got out of that, I think, for the first time in his writings, this idea that you can get into the technology quickly, and you can be an early adapter to the technology, and it can all be absolutely wonderful. But behind that, there is a human cost being paid of the sort you're talking about. I can remember in, was it early high school, when calculators came in, and it was going to ruin our ability to do add-ups and takeaways in our head. And that was the end of, swishing our minds. And when you look at all the decades that have gone past, we learned to adapt. And it may be that in this day and age, the skill of being able to add up huge columns of numbers in your head isn't required anymore. But alongside of that is, are we replacing with our minds the need to add up huge columns of numbers in that example? And we're moving on to leave that to machinery, and hopefully we're getting more into the thinking, strategizing, and the creative elements. So at the moment I read where people are writing things like the creative side of any job, be it accountant, be it teacher, be it artist, etc., journalist, and so on. The creative side is sort of being consolidated into the humans, but the hack work of writing headlines and daily columns and so on is being left to ChatGPT or its equivalent. So I think as the decades go by, different skills for us humans come into play, because machinery, innovation can take over the routine, mundane work. Now, whether we see that good or bad, there's always a transition as you go from people doing one thing to people doing another. The people who did those jobs lose their jobs, and the people who are in the new jobs using the new technology are fresh out of high school or university and so on. Classic computer software people. I think that's something society is kind of adapting to. What I think the idea of artificial intelligence adds to this, the sort of ChatGPT stuff we're talking about, is that the rate of transition is speeding up. So we can't wait for kids to come out of university with the latest software programming in their heads and so on. We've moved on in leaps and bounds every 3, 4, 5 years. And I think it's that rate of decay of our useful knowledge as humans that creates the problem, as I understand what you were just outlining there, that we're being left behind in the rate of innovation. And also our capacity to process large amounts of information. These databases we're talking about, these super large language models, but there are ones in music, there are ones in art, there are ones in developing computer software and all the mathematics and accounting. If the rate of increase of their abilities, those softwares, databases, if the rate of their ability to do more and more and more than what we can even comprehend the speed, then we're getting left behind every 5 years. And I think that is, from what you're saying, I think that's my take-home message.
I suppose what worries me is we don't know what we've lost. Like I'm thinking especially in terms of personal communication, which before the rise of the internet and the mobile phone, perhaps people were able, because they had to speak to each other personally in an analog rather than a digital way, that was a whole realm of communication that's somehow atrophying in the digital age. And so I suppose I'm trying to connect it perhaps to mental illness and the problems of isolation and loneliness that are growing, and so how much this sort of onslaught of new technology where people are relating to the machine rather than to other people is generating problems that are not easily seen.
Who was the medium of is the message, and later spoke about the medium massages the message. I think this intermediation of technology between humans, so we pick on the teenagers, they can be sitting alongside of each other in the bus texting each other and so on. That kind of, we could only converse if we have technology mediating our conversation.
We're speaking with their thumbs rather than their tongues.
Absolutely, and it's not sign language we're talking about. No, I think there are people who are writing well and truly into this field that we are losing that intercommunication, that direct intercommunication between humans, because we like the intermediation of technology. People said that with the telephone, but I like to talk to these guys. If I talk down the telephone, they sound different. It's a different conversation. I can't see them. So we invented TV phones, curious animal, just a little box that the French and the English loved. They were like little computer screens, and you could see this blurry image of the person, and that was the technologist's answer to, well, you can see the person. But then we get to the stage where you see the person's image. It's the zoom factor, if you like. We look at people and we think we know people because we see their zoom image, but we really haven't talked to them. There's that, what you're saying, that X factor that's lurking in there, that where, as the technology of intermediation goes on, and certainly ChatGPT is part of that, then we're losing this direct contact and this heavy reliance on intermediation of technology between person A and person B. And I think we're losing in that battle. Shona was next, I think. Oh, sorry. Can I go here first with the microphone?
Just 'cause I've jumped the queue. Is that all right? Yeah. Speak up. Yeah, that's fine. No problem. Thanks very much. I really enjoyed that. It's given me a little preview into what to expect for when I come in a month's time. I personally haven't. I've chosen not to engage very much with ChatGPT. I find it absolutely daunting and overwhelming, the capacity at which it can do. Universities mitigating these relationships with students as well. So I'm very aware. There's a few things that have come up to me, which I sort of would like your comment on. We've talked about some of the fear mongering with it and what can happen if it gets into the wrong hands. But it does seem to me like it does have huge potential to support human existence with the current pressures that we are. So, for example, I'm a disability support, and I have clients who find it incredibly daunting to plan dietary wise for their conditions that they have, make plans, write ingredient lists, plan for shopping quantities, go to do all that. There's a guy now who's using ChatGPT and does it all for him. So he just says, my conditions are this, this, this. I can't eat this, this, this. I should be eating more of this, this, this. Write me a meal plan for 2 weeks. ChatGPT does it, puts it all together for him. And then what he's done is link it with a special little kind of widget to his shopping cart trolley so that he can automatically have the list uploaded, and it does his shopping for him as well. Now that takes a huge pressure, mental load off this particular client to be able to do that. So that's wonderful potential in my opinion. And it's how do we make sure that the access and the uses and the purposes of this can be well educated, the capacity of it. So rather than just mimicking a human to write an essay or a PhD thesis or that kind of thing, I think there are some really interesting and unusual positive applications, and I wondered what your thoughts might be on those. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I've seen it be used in the context of just exposing the collective unconsciousness that you're speaking of. One prompt I saw was write me a story about a man and a woman, for example. And every single time ChatGPT puts the man in the position of power and puts the woman in the more docile position. It could be a doctor and a nurse, could be a mother and a child, whatever it might be. It constantly generates a response that puts the man in the position of more authority, more power, more whatever. And that's because it's getting fed with what we've given it, right? So I just want to point out that it's no more advanced. It can be deal with a large volume of information, but it doesn't necessarily know better than what we do. And if we've fed it on our flaws, how might that further exacerbate?
Thank you for your double question.
Double entendre.
Working backwards, the second question, gender bias and all the other social biases that we have in our language at the moment, it's being fed on. And the algorithms, like that slide that I said, had it all. How it will link this word with that word and the probability that this will follow that and so on. That's the problem, that there is no answer at the moment in ChatGPT or Bard or any of the others of this ilk, because the way they're trained governs the way they answer. And if the literature that they're trained on contains this, as our society does, and the bulk of the literature is still in all these biases and whatever, gender imperatives and so on, it's going to take a while before, in this area of work, that filters can be embedded into it to say that although the probability that the lead is always man or male, et cetera, rewrite that. Make it gender neutral. Can we specify a filter? Do they require he, him, she, her, that arrangement? That kind of filtering, I think, is ways off. But in what is called prompting, that is asking ChatGPT a question. In the jargon of the trade, that's prompting. You can begin your prompt with, don't give me this gender bias crap that I read that you're coming up with. You can say that. I want this neutral, or I want this to be female specific, or whatever is appropriate at the time, and just cut the usual biases that are there. And you can do it for political parties, but for medicine. Feed me on what really works. Feed me on naturopathics rather than ordinary pharmaceuticals. There are ways to filter, not well, because the database is still packed with all this, well, not misinformation, just skewed information, that our society is moving on at the same time. This database of ChatGPT was last fed information, the bulk of it, in November 2021. And even in a year, our language has moved on, events have moved on. So there's a problem. The big guys are aware of it. Whether they can do anything about it quickly enough, I think is problematic. In the wings, there's another type of database, another ultra large language database. We're talking words here, not the art, music and all the other stuff. In words, that doesn't work on probabilities, but works on what they describe as neurological connections. I have no idea what that means in practice, but they're not, the algorithms at the moment don't mimic the way our mind works. We tend to not think in algorithms. We might have learned things by rote, but by and large, we can be just zap a creative thought out of nowhere. It's not an algorithm. They're working on trying to organize this kind of neurological network. Once they achieve that, like fasten your seatbelt, because whilst we might be staggered by where ChatGPT is today, I would give it 5 years and it will be unrecognized. This is ChatGPT you'll be giving to kindergarten kids to play with, as other technologies have moved down the feeding chain. Tablets, I think very junior forms in schools, primary schools, are now into these sorts of things. It mightn't be the best where they've got these funny cartoon characters, and if that content hasn't been degenderized and worked into a more diverse writing, then it simply keeps repeating same old stereotypes. But I think there are very bright people, certainly in education, who recognize what we're talking about backwards and are starting to produce programs. I don't know in Australia, except for Monash University starting to get into this whole thing, what's appearing on a screen from an artificial intelligence educational point of view. And the last I read from them was last week, and they're saying, why not let in that case, university students use ChatGPT to write the essays? We're now going to market in a different way. We just don't want to know, did the people put in this fact and that fact? The Napoleonic War started here, they finished there, there were this number of wars, these battles, blah, 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 which you could basically, once upon a time, we might have gone to the Encyclopedia Britannica and regurgitated it. I'm thinking 50s, 60s, when you were writing stories like that. You could ask ChatGPT to do that. That's not the important aspect. The questioning, so-called from Monash Uni, is to say that students will be assessed on their critical evaluation of the material. ChatGPT can give you ideas in that area, but if the teachers are smart enough to ask the questions the right way around, then the compare and contrast that we used to get very used to was just really taking slabs of this part of the argument and slabs of that part of the argument, joining them together and, hey, teacher, here's my essay. But if we're asking for critical evaluation, like what would have happened if this didn't happen? It's one that I remember. And the Toronto Educational Authority, I think they're called, they've embraced ChatGPT for across their education sector, the use of it. So in primary school, it starts in a different way and it works its way up into college. And I think the universities there, that's this thing of using that technology, giving it to the kids, giving it to the students and saying, right, this is you've got Google search. We're not stopping you doing that. So now you can have ChatGPT or any of the other forms of it. And now we're going to ask you to do something really humanly creative with that information. I think, watch this space. I think the educators are not behind the 8 ball on this. It may look like it. And if you read the newspapers, of course, we're all going to hell in a barbed wire canoe. You know, but I don't think in that sense we are. I think education.
Thinking of a creative response, I remember coaching in Paris Peace Corps in 1968, allegedly was asked, well, what do you think the consequences of the French Revolution? He said, oh, well, it's a bit early to tell you.
Yes. I don't see anything wrong in using computers to get a shopping list. If she has then, the trap here is if that shopping list is constructed like, dear doctor, please give me a shopping list of things to eat that are good for my metabolism, then I think we're getting into kind of strange areas, because the answer you get back, and even ChatGPT has qualifiers in the front screen, which sort of say, be careful. Be careful from a mental health point of view, psychology point of view, chatting, discussion as if ChatGPT was your therapist, your dietitian in that case. I don't think that the way ChatGPT is constructed, you know, this probability of this follows that, you could get the latest American fad diets fed to you as if they were gospel. So I think there's more, you might get some ideas, but I think you need to be, as Jung was telling us, don't get too far into this. Remember who you are and why you're asking the question and what's in your best interests. Shona.
There is just so much to talk about with this. I don't know where to start. It's just, but one thing I read is that it's dumbing down in the time it's been used. So the answers are dumbing down. But another thing is anyone who's going to use it for research, you are just going to find and you said like it's been fed in 2021, but it like New Bing will give you references. Anyone with academic integrity is going to use that as a starting point, like you would use Wikipedia. And from there, you've got to go to the original sources and do the actual research and read the original sources, because it's not going to give you the right information all the time. And in terms of the kids using it, and I know academics are divided, like are trying to keep up, but for some of them saying, no, you know, you don't touch this, and especially young, new undergrads are not going to develop the research skills they need. But at the same time, other people saying, no, you know, this technology is here. Academics have to be across it and know how to use it properly. We've got to train the undergrads so that when they graduate, they can use it in the workforce, because it's going to be already used in the workforce. And the thing is, it seems to be a productivity tool, and it's going to increase productivity, speed productivity up. And anyone who's not across how to use this is going to be left behind. So that's what it seems to be. It gets you the initial
research, then you go off and do the proper work. So you still need to develop those research skills. But at the same time, you know, it's going to speed things up. So you're going to expect better work from undergrads. You're going to let them use it, but you're going to expect high quality work from them. And, you know, people who are not across it are just not going to keep up. And that was a lot. So I've probably said my piece. But another thing, when you're talking about neural networks, I thought it worked already like neural networks, and the probabilities were that it was teaching itself. Like neural networks, those weighted things, that's when the AI teaches itself. And I thought this was doing that, but it's not. So that's the way of the future, when you're going to get those, the neural networks that have these changes.
Yes.
That are going to be learning, updating by themselves and learning.
That's correct. Again, answering the second question first, it's all about probabilities. That diagram of probability that this word follows that and this one follows that. And when you get to the last word in the sentence, does it still follow back to the first word? And is it answering the question? That's, to me, algorithmic. I mean, other people describe them as if it's a magical, wonderful, but it's still holding very much to the patterns and probabilities of word usage in our language, as it is, because it's trained that way. It's the new versions are where they start to learn that because of the questionings and the answers they give, that's ChatGPT, the sort of questions it gets, the kind of answers it gives, and then the follow-ups that the people who are asking the question say, oh, no, I really meant this and I really meant that. That aspect of learning is being added into the next way, but they're not there at just the way the human brain can suddenly come up with an idea.
I'm not totally across this, but you know, things like perception are like modular, and so you know, information goes in and it comes out, whereas so it's domain specific, whereas we have this domain general thing for reasoning where all the we can get bits of information from all over the place, and it's not an algorithmic thing. And
yeah,
so that's why you can't kind of mimic the way the human brain's working, because this domain general thing is not computational, whereas you know
that's the state of play at the moment. I think they'll get there. I give them another 5 years before we start to see elements of that creep in, where seemingly totally disparate bits of information are being put together in totally new ways. Because in a sense, at the moment, the responses that come out of ChatGPT or the similar are really looking backwards, the way the language has been used and the ideas that are embedded in that language. It then puts it together and customized and churns it out. And if you say, but tell me what's going to be in 5 years' time, the database doesn't go forward to 5 years. It goes back to yesterday and asks itself, what do we think will be in place in 5 years' time? So that's not creative genius in that kind of system. All it's doing is regurgitating the best human ideas yesterday for what life will be like in 5 years. The other part you were talking to, I think from what I'm reading, I couldn't agree more with you that we will learn how to use this tool, that it is a productivity tool. It might also be a tool of war and a tool of cyber crime and so on and so forth. But for us decent people, and we all are, it's a productivity tool. It helps us brainstorm, very effective at doing that, getting ideas together. It's a very effective proofreader and editor. And in between, well, a combination of human and ChatGPT writing the paragraphs and putting them together, I think is the way it will enter then into the education system and so on. And educators will be demanding of results from essays and theses and so on because of that.
Can I ask one thing? Say you had an essay, 2,000 words, you put it in there to get it proofread. Does your original information then go into its database so that someone else can type in the same research question and get your original research as an answer?
Yes, is the short answer. And there's a court case in California at the moment, I think, against OpenAI for the way it has been training ChatGPT. And it's asking, the court is asking for full disclosure on where did you get this information? And whilst we're generally fed the answer, it's scanned and scooped all over the internet to pick up all these patterns. They didn't say, but I think they're about to say in court, that all the usage that you have against ChatGPT or I have is also being remembered. Our questions are being remembered, the answers are being remembered, and they're all being fed in to add further to the way words collocate together, the probabilities, this and that happening. So I think at the moment, the answer to your question is yes, it's not private, it's not confidential, and there is now a disclaimer on the front screen of ChatGPT to tell you that. Don't give us your personal information, your company information, your confidential information. There's a classic example, I think it's Sony in Japan. Their executives decided they had to write this huge report for the annual report about their company's progress, and they wanted it all summarized and put together and so on. They dumped all the confidential information of their division of Sony, dumped it into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT then, when other people like financial advisors and so on came in and said, what's Sony going to do? What's their plan for the next 5 years? Bang, out of spread. Very celebrated case. I don't know where those people are at Sony in Japan, but it was a hard-learned lesson that ChatGPT, to avoid being in court over that sort of thing, warns you. De-identify the information and don't give us confidential information and so on.
Thanks, John, for that talk. It was very interesting and it raised a number of questions in my mind. One was about probabilities themselves, because by their nature, when you form a probability, you discard a lot of possibilities. So when you're looking at this database as it really is and how it functions, you're really looking at. And then I look at what Jung is saying about individuation and the personal individual nature of us as beings, the infinite diversity of the human person. If we use language as part of that context, then the language we seem to be speaking about there is my personal language based on my experience, my intonation, my words, and not only that, but the weighting I put on the word, the tone I put on it. And I get to that point where I can't express something in words. It's not silence. Like keening at a funeral, it's just an emotion that can't be expressed in words. And I just wonder how we relate something like ChatGPT to that Jungian concept of self, and whether he wasn't looking at language in quite a different personal way to the way these algorithms come up with what economists would call economy-wide averages without that sensitivity of distributional effects of how individual people use individual words.
Yes, and at the moment, I think it's absolutely true to say that the database has no parameters attached to each word other than its probability of occurring before or after all these other words. Indeed. The idea of then adding parameters to say this word, if the person, let's get an example, if the question from that you put to ChatGPT is an angry one, you really have to say, I am angry with my teacher who has given me a bad mark, and I really want you to help me express my anger, but I'm not going to send it to my teacher. I just want to see it in writing. Then ChatGPT will start to organize the word anger and responses that collocate with it within all those probabilities. But if you've got a cricketer who says such and such a bowler is a real bastard, the answer there is that's praise. That's not invective. And that's not transmitted at all in the learning of the database. It's just that stream of words, probabilities that this word goes with that word and so on. I may pick up in a cricketing context and may never use the word bastard again. But, you know, we're talking about absolute enormous aggregates of information here, so that small nuances on particular words, like we Australians will have nuances that are a bit different to the New Zealanders, to the Canadians, to the Americans and so on. That hasn't got into the filtering structure or into the metrics attached to each word yet. There is some sense that when they introduce speaking rather than typing your words, so you speak into your computer, your question, then it's got a chance of picking up the emotion in your voice. Is it loud? Is it soft? Is it sweet? Is it staccato? And so on. So all those extra parameters that come with our voice activated typing, can be picked up. Not at the moment, because the databases are not structured to hold that information, but I dare say we're on the way. There are aspects of that in, what's the Apple? You go into your house and you say, Siri, play me music, yeah? Then there's an element of voice control being picked up, voice recognition. To the extent that it then picks up whether you're tired, you're invigorated, it wants to play you high pop music, or it plays you a nice lullaby. I don't think Siri has got there, but there'll be elements that creep into that side of it, this voice, the parameters within the voice being picked up and recognized. But ChatGPT doesn't go there unless you give it the word. I want an angry response. I want a formal response. I want you to talk like William Shakespeare when you answer me. I want a Donald Trump response. You can direct the output. It can do that. But it's not picking up Donald Trump. It's just going off to some quotes or something from Donald Trump and then giving you Trumpese type language. Thanks. Terry.
Thanks very much for that. Going talk, John.
Yeah, it's
greatly.
Zoom. I'm supposed to hear you.
Oh, is that better? Is that working? The most famous algorithm I know of not recent times was Einstein's E equals mc squared. Completely counterintuitive, essentially saying that matter and energy are the same stuff. So very creative. Before he talked about it, it was always true, but no one had ever realized it. How would it be possible for AI to be creative in that sense. In other words, discover something that is already there in the universe. Presumably there are other algorithms that are in the universe that top scientists will come up with in some time, and they are there, they exist. And they've existed ever since the world existed. And yet we don't know about them. But now, how could AI be, or could it be, used for those creative purposes?
Look, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be a squillionaire overnight, Terry. I think the way it's treated at the moment, it's largely based on historical, if we're talking about the word side of this whole thing, the words are as they were written, the ideas are as they were written, and they're projected into the future. So people yesterday had ideas about Canberra in 10 years' time, so it's into that. Newton's laws of thermodynamics and so on, it can project them forward into applications. But to ask it at the moment, give me some new laws of the universe about wormholes. I'm clutching at straws. It'll give you answers that has been in the literature about wormholes and what they may or may not exist and whether they may or may not be able to be used for this, that, and one thing and another. The idea of artificial intelligence developing not only a consciousness, but also an ability to think like Einstein in a way that reaches to totally new knowledge, not previously understood, like putting together E equals MC squared, right, in your example. They're not there yet, but I would fancy that the people who are into this artificial intelligence, so-called, and these large databases and so on, when they develop this thing about thinking like a human, whatever that really means when they get to it, they may be able to get it to the point where it's thinking the totally new. I don't see that at the moment unless there are military laboratories around the place that are, got this advanced technology that may be able to do that. But to think like Einstein of totally new things, not to think back and say, oh, well, he put E equals MC squared together this way, so therefore we can put something else together that way, using the constant of the speed of light or something, and conjecturing how we can travel the universe in nanoseconds through a wormhole. That's kind of science fiction that it'll come up with. It's not coming up with the answer that's testable in the classic scientific way. But I think they will get there. We're now into the scary area that I think humans, once they get wind that these databases and chatbots and so on can start doing that, then we will be in the area of where humans put a lot of guardrails in place. The three guys of industry have already been to Biden. They've already talked before a congressional committee. Juan Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, proposes an international forum to bring into place guardrails for the development of artificial intelligence in all of its forms for the goodness of humanity and not the other way. The UK Parliament is bringing in a more generalised, or has drafted a more generalised Act of Parliament or Bill for Parliament to try and encompass all developments in artificial intelligence, to put guardrails in place and almost to license the development of it. And the European Parliament is doing the same thing as we speak. So, if you like, regulatory guardrails are being talked about because people see how this could really get off the rails. But as I showed that one slide with Worm GPT, it doesn't matter what those governments do or what those leaders of industry do. Those who have malintent for this stuff are well out of the stable and on their way developing the stuff. And then it's just like at the moment, we have cyber warfare. The internet and all that it stands for was thought to be for good. We use it for good. Emailing and so on, all of us have got into that, we accept it, but we're still dealing with cyber fraud in the emails and so on. So I think we'll just progressively have to learn to deal with more and more of the bad side of any technology. Even the internet, just you know, with Google and so on, they've had to put guardrails in place. For Facebook has been demanded to put guardrails in place about political statements that may or may not be right. And then it becomes a question of privacy, freedom of speech, and so on. And democracies have a great deal of difficulty putting some of that kind of guardrail into place. So I think it's a rough sea ahead of us in that area. The technology is so potent that it's wide open for being abused, as much as Jung said. You know, the technology itself is good, but it's how it's used, for good or bad. That's the problem. Thanks.
Einstein actually came up with that theory whilst writing his bicycle. So it has nothing to do with being on a blackboard and calculating and figuring out functions of art. It's actually the physical motion of being on a bicycle. Say ChatGPT doesn't know the right one yet. So we're somewhat safe in that sense, that there is something intrinsic about our human connection with our mind that creates these rumbles.
Speaking of which, tell us about your, well, in a second. I was looking at it.
Give them a taste. Give them a taste.
Thank you very much, John. You did a fantastic job. Well, we really appreciate your efforts. Okay, John, we've got something here to give you. An appreciation of the Jung Society. We have a certificate of appreciation.
Thanks.
That's the least we could do. Thank you. And thank you, John. It was absolutely amazing. And you made us think so much more, you know. We go, like I see this on the computer, you know, go through the chat, this and that, and you think, well, what are we up to now? And then we look in the, I buy the Australian because I like the articles, and we go, you know, all the different articles about scientists and what's going on with the chat, you know, and things are not going very well and all these sort of things going on. So it's just constant chat with it all. Okay. Then we're progressing now to on the 1st of September, first day of spring. We have the lovely Sally coming to speak with us about transpersonal art therapy. And she says she has allowed her to work through life diminishing experiences and rewrite her story in ways that are life enhancing. So we really look forward to your talk. And on the Saturday, she'll be leading us through an outdoor experience at Gavilla Park. Robert and I have been, and Sally have been involved with development of Gavilla Park since the beginning. We started off with tiny little seedlings, now they're great big bushes near the going there, and you'll be having a nature walk and connection with well-being, and also we'll be hosting a lovely picnic. Sally has worked on developing that park as well as us, so she'll have a close personal connection with it. And she's brought a host of her friends along with nature lovers. Done a lot of weeding and a lot of work there. It's been amazing. So now some of us have the pleasure of participating in Kirsten and John's 8-part series, Adventures in Mindfulness and Meditation. And Robert and I did that with a few other people, and it was really fantastic. It made me realise and appreciate Robert as being the artist. I never thought of that. But when he came up with the most amazing mandalas and artwork, I was really surprised. If you'd like to, so we like, if you'd like to run that, John and Kirsten are thinking about doing that again with a Zoom format. So would you like to say something about that, John? Are you? Yeah.
Changing hats.
Yeah, that's right. The mandala hat.
It's.
I mean,
I
the
have to get in front
meditation
of that,
hat.
Don't I have to stand here with you
Yeah,
so they can
yes,
see us?
yeah. I'll get out of that.
Kirsten, who's the psychotherapist in the family here, it's her ideas to put these together. We were looking at a 4-week series, meditation, how to do it on different topics and so on, with MP3s or a disc for practice at home between each of the sessions. And the sessions this time to be in Zoom so that people can just do it in their home Sunday afternoons. And indeed, the mandalas, so you can show the mandalas by Zoom and so on. The combination of a meditation and then doing a mandala in the Jungian sense of the mandalas seems to be a powerful combination, which Kirsten's used frequently in her psychotherapy practice. And it never fails to put onto paper and to express stuff which people just can't find the words for because it's too traumatic or they just don't know how to speak about it. And so the therapy and so on can progress. Excuse me. In the sense of the 4-week course on Zoom, it's not heavy duty therapy, but it's to introduce that technique, which you can then go on to use when you have those moments when you just can't sort out things and you want to have a little meditation and then a bit of a mandala drawing and then look at what you did, the color, the shapes, the sizes and so on of objects and get some insight into how your psyche's working. We haven't got a date yet, but we think late, is it November? It's outside of school holidays and before Christmas sets in. Yeah. October. Yeah.
So if you wanted to keep abreast of what we're doing, you can look at the website. Sally, would you like to come up here and say a couple of words? We've known Sally for quite a while.
Yes,
Well,
maybe 2 years now, I think. Yeah.
and Sally is amazing. She brings her friends. She brings all her friends to do a huge job with our garden. Yeah.
Oh boy. Yeah, thank you. I won't say much. I'll just say that it's a real challenge for me to be invited to come to something like this. My training and practice to date has been largely done online through the College of Complementary Medicine. So I've had a peer community. As far as I'm aware, I'm one of the only practitioners in Canberra having gone through this current iteration of the training. So it's been quite lonely. So to come and declare my love of Jung and his different practices and thoughts on things is going to be a bit different in this format. I work with clients of all different backgrounds, mainly in group settings, but also one-on-one. And what I thought is that we might do a bit of an experimental, playful session. So I'm not just talking at you the whole time. So the invitation, whether you're on Zoom or whether you're here in the room, is to actually bring a little pad and paper to do a bit of a few different exercises, and it'll be practical. And then the following day, we're going to return to Grevillea Park, to the Environment Meditation and Healing Garden, and do some nature connection practice and really look at the symbolism and wisdom held in nature for healing. No weeding. We'll keep clear of the weeding that day, more for personal reflection. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that's my plan really, is to have it more of a playful and engaging way, and I'll show you and also invite you to do some of your own exploration. That's the plan. Yeah, beautiful.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming tonight. And we look forward to seeing you on the 1st of September. And I'd like to thank Rob with his lovely music, and to thank the committee people, Jeff, coming along, and Shauna, and for John and Kirsten and Trish and Richard for being there and just ongoing with the committee. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next time.